Let's take a look at a really simple program. So we're inside of the workbook Mike.xlsm. .xlsm means it's a macro-enabled workbook, so I can put code into it, save code, execute code, things like that, VBA code. I'm inside of a module because we put our code in modules. I'm inside of a module named Mike's module. If I need to insert a module, I can go up to Insert and Module. Then when I highlight it in the project window, in the properties window, I can modify the name. And again, we could have different modules for different large pieces of logic. This is a really small example. We just have one. I'm inside of a sub or a subroutine or a macro. They all mean the same thing. I can name it anything I want. It should be named something descriptive. This isn't descriptive, but it's just a test for now. We could name it tax calculation or import from database. Something like that would be more descriptive. I open the sub and I close the sub. Then my code is inside of the sub. First thing I need to do is declare variables, and we'll talk more about those later, but that's what I'm doing here. Dim is just a word that's left over from early coding. It means dimension. We're just interpreting it as declare. This could be anything I want it to be. I get to make this up. It should probably be descriptive. I am going to create a variable called first name as, and this is my data type. I'm just storing it as a string right now. And again, we'll talk more about variables in a bit. Now that I have the first name variable and the last name variable declared, I need to populate them. So into that first name storage space I created with my variable up here, I'm going to have an input box pop up with the question, what is your first name? The user will type their name in the box. They'll click OK. What the user types then gets stored in my first name variable. A second input box will pop up asking their last name. The user will type that in and click OK. When they click OK, that will get stored into the last name variables. And then I have a message box that will pop up, and the message box takes the whatever is stored in the variable first name, so whatever the user typed, it got stored up here. Add to that whatever the user typed in the second input box, and is now stored in the variable last name. So the program will look like this when it runs. So not terribly exciting, but if we look at the four things that a computer can do, or a program can do, most of them are in here. So the first thing that we want to be able to do is input data. We have to put data into our computer program somehow, and we're doing that right here with our input boxes. The second thing that the computer program can be able to do, or should be able to do, is store data, and here we're doing that. We're storing them in variables. The third thing a computer program should be able to do is manipulate data. This is really basic manipulation, but we're taking two things and putting them together. And the last thing that the computer should be able to do, or the program should be able to do, is output the data, or give usable results back to the user, and we're doing that through a message box. Now again, these are really very basic, very simple examples, but we're showing the four components that a program should be able to do. We can do them very, very simply. Here's another way to do this. So I've declared the variables. I'm populating that variable with whatever the value is of range A1. In this case, it'll be Mike. Then populate last name variable with whatever the value is of range B2. And the value just means the content. And then I can go a different direction with them. I can write into that range. So range D1 the value property is going to be equal to whatever was in my first name variable plus whatever was in my last name variable. So if I do that, the application works like this. So now my input are basically Excel cells, and my storage or output will be different cells. So I can write to and read from cells on the same worksheet, on a different worksheet, on a different workbook. I can open them all up and get the information, so I can input that way, as well as message boxes. I can store in variables, or I can store them into cells in this worksheet or a different worksheet or a different workbook. And I can output to a message box or into a cell on the same worksheet, a different worksheet, or a different workbook. And then manipulation could be very simple, just appending two things together, or it could be an incredibly complex mathematical function that we're trying to do. So manipulation really gets down to the logic and to the heart of the problem that we're trying to solve with our Visual Basic application. We can have multiple subroutines. Here I'm creating a subroutine that's going to be clear cell, and I will clear out whatever is in range D1. My cursor's inside of this sub. When I run this sub, it clears it. When I put my cursor here, runs that application. When I put all of these subs together and all of my modules together, it becomes the program. So we're using subs to break up sub pieces of logic or smaller pieces of logic. We're using modules to break it into large chunks of logic. And when I put all of this together, all of the VBA inside of my Excel worksheet here is my program.